If you're looking for a practical repertoire, not depending on memorization and a real one, it's not something like, for example, a system. No, it is a repertoire. Then you are in the right place here. And this is actually the third episode. We're talking about mastering the Queen's Gambit, which is started by d4, d5, c4. In the first episode, we talked about the Queen's Gambit declined e6. In the second one, we talked about the Slavs. But we cannot actually go for knight f6 without talking about maybe it's not a trendy line, but recently, like in the previous 5 years probably or so, started to gain more popularity. Yeah. So after c4, which is called the QGA, Queen's Gambit accepted. And after d takes c4, Black says, okay, I don't want to enter theories, I want to take on c4, and hopefully in the future I can exchange c5 with d4 and like having open d file, c file without too many complications and doing good. And actually computer is not mad about this choice for Black. It's a choice, it's fine, and Black is okay. And from the beginning I have to say, you cannot take this opening down easily. But what's advantage of this as white? You do have kind of permanent advantage thanks to the extra central pawn that you are going to have. So after d takes c4, my recommendation again is practical, solid, based on understanding. Here we go, knight f3. Quickly, why not e4? Because e5 is interesting for Black, c5 is interesting for Black, knight f6 is interesting for Black, knight c6 is interesting again. Also b5 is an idea. Why? Because e4 is weak, so maybe it can be attacked, it's weakened, yeah? So that's why I recommended this idea of knight f3. Okay, wait a second, why not e3? Because of e5 again, very interesting move. And if you are a Queen's Gambit accepted, I recommend you checking out this line, especially like after e5, bishop takes, knight c6, knight f3, e4, knight d2. There's this interesting idea, queen g5. For example, knight takes e4 is the best move, then queen takes, attacking, knight g3, then queen g3. And this is a very crazy line and very crazy game of chess is going to be happening, which is requires too many memorization, too many opening knowledge, not based on understanding. What can you understand of this position? It can be changed in one move. So that's why we choose knight f3. And this should be your choice. So after knight f3, knight f6 is the most played move, but we cannot done without talking about why this idea is not great, like the protection of the pawn, because we go first a4, and now a6 is obvious, cannot be played, takes, and the rook will be taken. So the only protection is c6, and now I go e3, and after e6, this is the only move that I want you to remember. And after that, you're going to have a great, constant, almost permanent advantage, just b3. After b3, c takes b3, bishop takes b5. And I do believe we have seen this before. Like after, for example, bishop d7, you could go queen takes b3, knight c3, bishop a3, castling. And this is actually a weak pawn. We have seen some kind of these ideas in the Slav, I do believe, in the second episode of Mastering the Queen's Gambit. So after knight f6, we choose e3. What's our idea? Our idea is simple. We want our pawn back. So we take the pawn and then improve, finish the development, and then go for e4. Then seize the center. But now we just go, we have to calm down a bit. We cannot like, oh, Queen's Gambit accepted, we need to win immediately. There's no immediate win. So after e3, Black has two choices. The first one is bishop g4, the second one is e6. Probably e6 is the main line and the most played move, but I want to talk for a few seconds for this move or about this move. Here, I go simply bishop takes c4, gaining my pawn back. And my ideas are easy. I go knight bd2, I go b3, I go bishop b2, and then I castle. And every single piece of mine is doing great. And a quick idea I wanted to mention, like for example, castling bishop b7, knight bd2, castling b3, say knight bd7, bishop b2. Why the bishop in such a structure is great on the square? And again, we have seen this theme before. That's what makes this series almost like connected. Because Black cannot generate any kind of counterplay without going for c5 or e5. With the bishop being placed here, e5 cannot be a real idea because I have once, twice, probably thrice. So the only idea for black to generate counterplay is to go for c5. And after c5, you do have two choices. After you take, you push, or you wait. Three choices actually. Maybe pushing is not a serious one. But the point is, your bishop will be great along this diagonal. Either you take or your opponent will take. You're completely doing great. So this is just everything you needed to know about bishop g4. It's not a theoretical line. You have a small advantage, but a permanent one. And probably your play is going to be simple. But just remember ideas of b3, bishop b2. So let's get back now to the main stuff. e3, we want our pawn back. We talked about b5, a4, b3 ideas. So e6 is the main move, and we take bishop takes. And now a6. a6 actually, it might not be the most played move, but it's the most common move. Like if you study, for example, whatever, bishop e7, then a6, b5 is an idea. If, for example, you study whatever, like bishop d6, then a6. If you study c5, then a6 is coming. So a6 is a typical move in this structure for black. And many ideas for that, mainly b5. And in this position, I want you to remember this idea. It's actually a general concept, but it's a very important specifically in this position. The general concept, don't go automatically against your opponents or against your opponent's moves. Like for example, your opponent, like many players, like, oh, my opponent played a5, he wanted to play a4, then I go a4. Wait a second, a5 might be a mistake. Don't go a4. So now in this position after a6, actually this is a very interesting move because many players will go a4. And now, because this knight is not developed yet, it can go to b4 now, either with c5 or without c5. b4 square is completely weakened. What do I mean by a weak square? It's a square that cannot be covered by pawns. So you already moved your c pawns twice, disappeared, and you move your a pawn twice, disappeared. Or not disappeared, but the protection of the b4 square is completely gone. That's why here in this position, we allow b5. Wait, but this is kind of tempo. Like b5, no, I don't like this kind of chess. My opponent now is happy. Let him be happy or her for a few seconds because our idea now is great. I go bishop e2 simply, and after bishop b7, I say to my opponent, thanks for coming earlier. a4 very strong. And after a4, we're attacking. If you take, then a6 square or a6 pawn is very weak because you open the a file. And if you push, which is probably the most or the must played move, now simply I can now thank you for the c4 square because d5 is already disappeared and b5 or the b pawn cannot control the c4 square. So you simply go knight bd2. And after knight bd7, what to play? What to put this bishop? Simply b3. Why? Because again, in these structures, black cannot do without e5 or c5, especially here. The c file is open, so c file has to be coming. This bishop after that, either you take or you let your opponent take. This bishop will be a great piece. That's perfect. So b5 is not an issue, and we simply castle. So what's left is this idea, c5. And now, if you like endings, this is not my recommendations, but if you like endings, or if you forget, or if you're lazy, tired, did not sleep, you could go simply dc5. Exchange queens, b3, bishop b2, knight bd2, rook d1, rook c1 are doing perfectly fine. But if you are looking for a middle game fight, for attacking fight, then I recommend you this great move, queen e2. Well-timed queen e2. Why? Because if you delay this, for example, for one move, say h3, and your opponent is playing knight c6, then you cannot go for queen e2, which is actually a chance, has to be taken. So after c5, queen e2, what's the idea of that move? The idea is mainly to make a room for the rook to come to the game earlier, and it's going to be very strong rook. And now, for example, if c takes d4, You could go rook d1 and take with the knight, but we are happily going for the isolated pawn. The isolated pawn in this structure is great. Why? Because we have a great development firstly. Secondly, we do have the idea of rook d1. So now, for example, bishop e7, rook d1, and we will see some games for that idea. And after castling knight c3, now the bishop will be heading to the g5 square, rook ac1, probably ideas like bishop b3, bishop c2, queen d3 is coming, knight e5 is coming, and now, pay attention. After you manage to play knight e5, then, for example, say, one of the strategies for black is to control the d5 square. This is the way to fight against the isolated one. Like, for example, knight b7, bishop b3, knight b6, say a3, for example, knight d5, I go knight e5. Now, very important idea of rook d1 is the rook left, rook d3. This is a super very strong move. After rook d3, there's rook g3, rook h3, bishop c2, attacking here. The queen might join the attack at any time. Bishop g5 to be coming. Black most likely is going to be checkmated, or at least he needs to be super accurate not to get checkmated. So that's if actually he played c5. Again, b5 is not a great move. We simply go bishop d3. And if not, c takes d4. We do have ideas here. For example, we talked about this a4, very interesting. Wait a second, but you did not talk about c4. After c4, white now is strategically almost winning. Why? Because we do have a free center. There's no pressure against our center. e4 is coming without any pressure. Very well supported. The knights can be coming. The bishop as well. This is weak. Rook d1, rook e1. The other rook will be coming to d1. Black is suffering strategically. Doesn't know what to do. And whenever e5 came, probably d5. I mean, okay, probably you will win a pawn, but for example, you cannot d5. And this is a protected passer, and this bishop is useless along this diagonal. So the only actually idea is cd4. Again, ed4, bishop b7. Again, our idea, which is rook d1. Does knight c6 prevent rook d1? Quick question for you. Unfortunately for black, it doesn't. Because if you take here, there's this famous tactics. Bishop b5, and then the queen will be taken. So after ed4, bishop b7, as we talked before, rook d1, and then knight c3, and then bishop g5. And the main idea for black is knight bd7, knight, like for example, this way, knight b6, knight d5, then we go knight e5 again, queen d4 does not work because of this. And we move the bishop away, probably rook d3, rook g3 also to be happening, and white is doing great. This is actually the general explanation. I do believe it's very useful. I do believe you don't need to see more games for that, but let's see a couple of games. 3 games we will see. First one is actually a very instructive game. It's Kovalenko against 𝒁𝒂𝒂𝒕𝒊𝒐𝒏. 𝒁𝒂𝒂𝒕𝒊𝒂𝒏 is 2400. Kovalenko is 2656 rated player. So d4, d5, knight f3, knight f6, c4, dc. This is another move order, but it's completely fine. e3, bishop takes c4. After bishop takes c4, a6, and again, should we go a4? Never. We go we go simply castling. b5, bishop e2. And bishop b7, what's our move? a4, exactly. Why a4? Because we want to fight for the c4 square. b4, knight bd2, knight bd7. What to do with this bishop? Exactly, b3. Now you learned the lesson. b3, bishop b2. And you're doing great. And I mean, black cannot do without c5, and c5 came. Shall I take? Not necessarily, because you could do it whenever you would like to. And if your opponent takes, it doesn't add anything to him. It just improved my pieces, like either with the queen, with the bishop, or with the knight. The main idea, or the main strategical idea, is that this bishop is on fire. So knight f e5, cd4, bishop d4, knight c5 played. And now, very deep concept. If you manage in such structure to enter, which is serious, I mean, you have a serious chance here to enter an end game or middle game with a knight fighting against the dark square's bishop, that will be strategically winning for white. How that can be coming? Easily. Bishop f3, first of all. Bishop takes f3. I cannot take with the queen because of knight b3. but it's fine. Knight takes. Rook c8, rook c1. Knight fe4, queen c2, improving the queen. And now queen c7. And what's the move now? Bishop takes c5. Why bishop takes c5 is the move? Because black is trying, or white is trying, to achieve what we talked about. And probably he will. And after knight fd2, rook fd8, what's the move? Knight e4. Wow, great concept. Either you go passively with your knight back, or you exchange it. I will exchange it for sure as black. And now, suffer, my opponent suffer. Computer might say this is slightly better for white. But this is a huge advantage for white. Actually, it's not. Because it seems like black is a piece down. And after bishop f6, rook fd1, again, I want to remind you what the rule says. Queen and knight cooperate better than a bishop and a knight, and the queen. So g3. Why g3? Making a room for the king, but why not h3? Because this room actually it's a vague room, because the bishop can cover it later on. But g3, no, you cannot do anything. g6, h4, h5, king g2. I don't mind any source of endings, and soon black will sacrifice a pawn, not to, or in order to free himself, kind of. Like knight d6 is a great move. Now the rook is under fire. Also rook b7 is a threat, so you have to take. I take back. Now queen c5 attacking the queen or attacking the knight. Instead of defending passively, black or white found this idea. It's now the transformation of advantage. Either you allow knight d6 or you exchange the knight with the bishop here. Now white is a pawn up and he's completely winning. Like just very little accurate moves. Queen b6, protecting f2. If you take on e5, I'll take on a6 and we'll have two passers easily winning. So queen e2 supporting the pawn, but simply a5, b4, and queen c5. Everything is protected. One check. Queen c6, prevent checks, and then the pawn is going to be queening very soon, and it's not even a race, and white is completely winning. This is a very instructive game. I advise you to see it again and again and again and again. Actually, whenever you mention to me the QGA, the Queen's Gambit accepted, this game appeared to my mind, and you can find it actually on YouTube. So after dc4, knight f3, this is a game between Daniil Dubov, 2700, against Nihal Sarin, 2628. e3, e6, bishop c4, c5, castling a6. What's our move now? Great. Queen e2. You're paying attention. b5, bishop d3. Takes. But now, instead of the classical, typical, normal rook ed4 followed by rook d1, a4 Dubov played. Crazy game. B takes a4, rook takes a4, and the game finished in 8 moves. Yes, 8 moves. Bishop b7, rook takes d4, attacking the queen. Queen b6, knight bd2, and the rook is under fire, but no, rook h4. Bishop b7, knight c4, the queen is under fire. Queen c7, and now bishop d2. After castling, simply bishop c3 in this position. Looking towards the king, look at these two monsters, actually, not bishops. Nihal, in order to decrease probably the pressure, he played g6, but now Dubov played knight g5, and after knight g5, knight d5 is played, because now bishop takes f6 followed by knight takes h7 is probably a threat. Knight d5 is played by Nihal, trying to pin the knight, attacking the knight, hoping things will be great, but now white to play and finish the game. What a move. Now the point is, if you take here, simply bishop takes h7 is going to be a checkmate. And if you don't take, you will be checkmated for sure, because like what can you do? Like you cannot protect if this simplest move is bishop takes f6 and you're completely winning again. So this is probably another game, and the last game of our session today. After d4, d5, c4, dc. I mean, we don't go e3 because there is e5 now. Very interesting idea. We go knight f3 first, but this is a transposition. c5 castling, and after a6, what's our move? Exactly, queen e2. Why do I insist in this move? Because probably it's the most played one. The most played setup for black. Bishop d3, again c4 is a bad move, so cd, ed, bishop e7, we go knight c3, we go rook d1, after castling we simply go bishop to g5, after bishop g5, knight bd7, and now actually you don't even wait knight bd7, and you could go knight e5 right away, because again, according or thanks to this rook being here, such ideas are not great, because always there is some stuff along this open file, so it's not recommended. And actually, again, psychologically it's not easy, because black knew that he or she has to play against this isolated pawn. So why to correct the correct the isolated pawn for free, and you improve my pawns and you put yourself under probably huge attack. Anyhow, so after knight e5, h6, bishop h4, keeping the pressure, knight b6, and now interesting plan. Actually, it's not necessary. Again, I do believe you could do what we have talked about, like for example, rook a c1, bishop b1, rook d3, rook g3, rook h3, etc, etc. But here white found another interesting idea, which is bishop takes f6. The point is, I'll give you the dark squared bishop, but I will have a control over e5 square or over c5 square, very strong knights, knight e5, knight c5. Now the bishop is under fire, bishop d5, rook a c1, always bishop takes a2, there is b3. So bishop d6, bishop b1, maybe ideas like queen c2 to be coming along this file. f5 is played, but now again see, rook c3. We have talked about this rook left. Queen e8, f4, and b3, easily rook g3, the rook is coming to the attack, queen d2, very interesting actually way of playing for white. I mean, giving up the dark squares or dark squared bishop and then put everything on dark squares. So you cannot feel the absence of that bishop. King h7, rook c1, queen e8, bishop d3, improving the position slowly. See again, dark squares, dark squares, dark squares, dark squares, dark squares, dark squares. Like the only piece that is not on the dark squares is the light squared bishop. Maybe this pawn as well. So bishop takes b5, e takes, or d takes, and now queen d6, and entering using the d file takes, bishop d5, knight takes a6, very interesting move. Actually, some ideas like check and then rook g6 to be coming. If rook a6, probably bishop b5 as well. Too many pawns, too many material. So knight c4, the sacrifice is not accepted. This is actually a very strong pawn. d7 as well, and now a4. You cannot take, you cannot you cannot touch because of rook takes c4. So rook d7, sacrificing the exchange, but in vain. Rook c1 and then rook c8, rook c7, either you exchange or you'll be checkmated. And here in this position, Artyom resigned this game. I mean, he's 2200 even rated player, but nothing to be actually done. This is the Queen's Gambit accepted. I hope you're doing or you understand it very well. Don't forget to check the whole playlist of mastering the Queen's Gambit. So far we talked about the e6, the c6, the dc. In the near future we will talk about d4, knight f6, and ideas like, for example, Nimzo Indian, ideas like King's Indian, ideas like Binko, Binonis, for example, c5, etc, etc. You will be a complete Queen's Gambit master after watching the series. So never forget to subscribe to the channel to get notified whenever we publish our next mastering the Queen's Gambit episode. Thanks for watching again. See you soon. Have a nice one.